It had been a long, exhausting week for Ashley. A mother of two, she worked tirelessly as a nurse at the local hospital, rarely having time to unwind or relax. But this weekend was different. It was supposed to be their escape, a family getaway into the wilderness. Ashley had planned this trip for months, convincing her son, Xavier, and daughter, Zara, to join her. After all, they had spent years working and stressing over deadlines. It was time to reconnect with nature. Ashley was not one to shy away from the outdoors, but she had always been protective, cautious, especially with her children. They lived in a busy, urban environment, where traffic, noise, and constant pressure kept them in a perpetual state of hurry. Now, as they pulled up to the entrance of the remote forest campgrounds, a sense of peace washed over her. The thick trees surrounded them like a blanket, muffling the outside world. The gentle rustle of leaves made the whole place feel like a sanctuary. "Mom, this place looks amazing," Xavier said as he took in the towering trees and distant mountains. "It's perfect," Zara added, her eyes wide with excitement. They parked the car near a secluded area, where no one else was around. The family had the entire spot to themselves. As they unloaded the car, the air smelled fresh and crisp, the kind of air that seemed to cleanse the soul. Zara and Xavier immediately ran off to explore, while Ashley took her time unpacking their gear. She set up the tent and laid out sleeping bags, savoring every moment of the calm. By the time the sun dipped low, the forest was bathed in an ethereal golden light. The campfire crackled, sending sparks into the air. The sound of the fire, mixed with the chirping of crickets, provided a natural lullaby. It was a peaceful moment, one Ashley had been craving for months. The kids were happy, and everything felt right. As night fell and the warmth of the fire lingered, they sat around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and telling stories. Ashley felt a sense of relief in her bones. They had no idea that their peaceful retreat would soon turn into a nightmare. The forest, silent and calm as it seemed, held secrets, dark secrets, that had been buried for decades. "Mom, I heard something," Zara whispered, suddenly looking uneasy. Ashley's heart skipped a beat. "It's probably just an animal, sweetie. Don't worry," she reassured her. But something felt off, as if the air had thickened around them. A strange stillness had descended upon the camp, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. Ashley brushed off the unease, telling herself it was just nerves. After all, they were in the middle of nowhere, far from civilization. She smiled, trying to calm Zara's fears. But in the back of her mind, something gnawed at her. She couldn't shake the feeling that this trip wasn't just a chance to escape, it was the beginning of something far darker. As the fire flickered, casting long shadows that danced among the trees, Ashley felt a sudden unease deep in her stomach. She tried to ignore it, instead focusing on the quiet contentment of her children, but it lingered. Xavier and Zara, both young and full of energy, were eager to settle into their surroundings. Zara, especially, was thrilled. She had always loved nature, her wide eyes reflecting the stars above as she talked about exploring the woods. "Let's go hiking tomorrow, Mom," Zara exclaimed, bouncing around with excitement. "I want to see the whole forest." Ashley chuckled, trying to dismiss her growing unease. "We'll see what the morning brings. It's been a long day, let's get some rest, okay?" "Yeah, okay," Zara said, her enthusiasm dimming just slightly. But even as she agreed, she seemed to scan the trees around them, as though sensing something. Xavier was already lying in the tent, earbuds in, his face buried in his phone as he scrolled through social media. He hadn't shown much interest in hiking or exploring the wilderness, preferring his gadgets and games. But Ashley didn't mind. She was just glad they were spending time together as a family, away from the distractions of their everyday lives. Ashley wrapped up the campfire activities, putting out the last embers with water from their cooler. She stepped into the tent, making sure everything was in place for the night. She unrolled sleeping bags and set out a few items they might need for the evening: a flashlight, a first aid kit, and a small, portable radio in case of emergency. "I'm going to put the food in the car so animals don't get into it," she said to her kids. "You think animals will come around?" Xavier asked, his voice muffled by his earbuds. Ashley shrugged. "Just to be safe. There's no harm in being prepared." Her instincts told her to be cautious. This trip had started off so beautifully, but something about the vastness of the forest, the isolation, kept gnawing at her. She couldn't quite place it, but something felt off. As she stepped outside to store the food, she glanced at the dark silhouettes of the trees surrounding their camp. There was an eerie quiet now, a silence that seemed unnatural. The forest, which had been so alive with the sounds of nature earlier in the day, was now eerily still. She shook her head, trying to dismiss the thought. It was just her imagination. Everything would be fine. They'd get some rest, and in the morning, the forest would feel different, inviting, like the adventure it was meant to be. But as she glanced back at the tent, where Zara was now sitting with her knees hugged to her chest, staring out at the trees with a furrowed brow, Ashley couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The night stretched on, and the temperature dropped quickly. Ashley zipped herself into the sleeping bag and closed her eyes, willing herself to sleep, but rest wouldn't come. Every sound seemed amplified in the stillness of the night. The crackling of branches, the occasional rustling of the wind, and the soft hum of crickets outside were the only noises. Around midnight, Ashley woke with a start, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know why, there was no noise, no sign of danger, but something had woken her. She glanced at the tent's entrance and saw the shadows of her children, still nestled in their sleeping bags. Zara's eyes were closed, her body curled up tightly. Xavier was snoring lightly, a peaceful sound. Ashley took a deep breath and tried to relax, rolling over to find a more comfortable position. But before she could drift back into sleep, a low noise from outside the tent caught her attention. A faint rustling. Soft footsteps. Ashley froze, her heart pounding once again. There was no way an animal could be so quiet. She looked to the tent flap, wondering if a bear or a raccoon was sniffing around. But something felt wrong. It wasn't the sound of an animal. It was more deliberate, more human. "Zara," she whispered, her voice barely a murmur. No answer. She repeated it, but the silence that followed was deafening. She quickly unzipped the flap of the tent, peeking outside. At first, she couldn't see anything. Just the dark expanse of trees and the faint outline of the distant mountains. Then, her stomach dropped. Zara was gone. Ashley's breath caught in her throat. She had been lying next to her daughter moments ago, and now, nothing. Panic gripped her chest as she scrambled out of the tent. "Zara," she shouted, her voice cracking in the still night. Xavier woke with a start, looking around in confusion. "Mom. What's going on?" Ashley barely heard him. She was already rushing toward the woods, the flashlight in her trembling hands cutting through the darkness. "Zara," she screamed again, the terror rising in her chest. There was no answer. The trees stood like dark sentinels, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward her, and the only sound was the pounding of her own heart. Xavier followed her into the woods, calling for his sister, but his voice was small and shaky. "Mom, where is she?" "I don't know." Ashley's voice was raw with fear. Her mind raced, how could she have disappeared so quickly, so silently? They searched for what felt like hours, combing through the dense underbrush, calling out her name. But there was no sign of Zara, no trace of her, nothing to explain her sudden vanishing. The cold began to settle in, and dread twisted in Ashley's gut. Something was wrong. Something unnatural was at play here. Just as they began to lose hope, the wind picked up, carrying with it a faint whisper, a voice, distant and chilling. "Help me." Ashley's heart stopped. It was Zara. Ashley's blood ran cold at the sound of Zara's voice, weak, distant, and haunting. The words echoed through the trees, sending a chill down her spine. She looked to Xavier, his face pale with fear, his eyes wide in disbelief. "Did you hear that?" Ashley whispered, her voice barely audible. Xavier nodded, his voice trembling. "Yeah, it came from over there." Ashley didn't hesitate. She took off, her heart pounding with every step, desperate to find her daughter. Xavier followed closely behind, calling Zara's name in frantic bursts. The woods seemed endless, stretching in all directions, dark and oppressive. The trees loomed over them like silent witnesses, their twisted branches clawing at the sky. "Zara! Answer me!" Ashley shouted, her voice breaking as the fear consumed her. But there was no reply, only the eerie rustling of leaves in the wind. The darkness swallowed their calls, leaving them alone in the suffocating silence. After what felt like hours of searching, Ashley and Xavier stumbled upon something that made their blood run cold. There, in the center of a small clearing, was a series of ancient, weathered stones arranged in a circle. It looked like a forgotten ritual site, overgrown with moss and ivy, a place that had long been abandoned by time. Ashley's breath caught in her throat as she stepped closer. The stones felt wrong, as though they were watching her, waiting. There was a palpable heaviness in the air, a sense of foreboding that made her skin crawl. She could feel the weight of something dark and ancient hanging over them, as though the very earth beneath her feet was alive, breathing. "What is this place?" Xavier whispered, his voice barely a tremor as he looked around. "I don't know," Ashley replied, her voice shaky. "But I think we've found the key to what's happening here." The stones seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, and Ashley's thoughts raced. Was this some kind of ritual ground? Was it tied to whatever force had taken Zara? Suddenly, a thought struck her. The ancient markings on the stones, symbols carved into the surface, looked familiar, though she couldn't quite place them. Then, she remembered the stories her grandmother used to tell her, the ones about a curse that haunted the land, passed down through generations. It was a tale of a powerful entity, a force that thrived on fear and despair, and could steal the souls of the living. Ashley's heart pounded harder as the realization hit her. The curse her grandmother had warned her about, it was real. She looked around, frantic. "We need to leave. Now." She grabbed Xavier's arm, pulling him away from the circle of stones, but something held them back. A low, rumbling growl echoed from the depths of the woods, followed by a deep, guttural voice that seemed to come from the very earth beneath their feet. "Leave, or perish." Ashley froze, her blood running cold. The voice wasn't human. It was deep and ancient, a terrifying sound that seemed to vibrate in her bones. Xavier's face went pale as he turned to look at her. "Mom, what was that?" "I don't know, but we're in danger," Ashley whispered, her breath ragged. The sound was still lingering in the air, vibrating through the forest. Something was coming, something far worse than she could ever have imagined. They ran. Back at camp, Ashley and Xavier scrambled to gather their things, the weight of the curse pressing down on them like a suffocating blanket. They had to leave the forest before it was too late, but with Zara still missing, Ashley couldn't bring herself to abandon her daughter. "Zara! Where are you?" Ashley called, her voice hoarse with panic. But there was no answer. Only the sound of the wind through the trees and the occasional distant growl that seemed to grow louder, closer. Ashley's mind raced. She couldn't leave Zara behind. She couldn't. Then, just as she was about to give up hope, she heard it again, Zara's voice, weaker this time, but still unmistakable. "Help, me." Ashley's heart leapt in her chest. "Zara," she screamed, sprinting toward the sound, her fear pushing her forward. Xavier hesitated, his eyes wide with terror. "Mom, wait. Don't." But it was too late. Ashley had already plunged deeper into the woods, driven by the one thing she could still hold on to, hope. She had to find her daughter. She had to break the curse. The forest seemed to close in around her as she ran, the trees shifting and warping in her peripheral vision. Shadows danced at the edges of her sight, and the eerie growls seemed to follow her every step. "Zara!" Ashley shouted, breathless. "Please, where are you?" Suddenly, the air grew cold, a biting chill that cut through her bones. The woods had gone silent, and the ground beneath her feet seemed to shift, as though the earth itself were alive. Then, just ahead, she saw a flicker of movement. There, lying on the ground, was Zara. But she wasn't alone. Ashley's breath hitched in her throat as she saw her daughter lying on the ground, her body limp and motionless. But it wasn't the sight of Zara that chilled Ashley to her core, it was the dark figure standing over her. A towering, shadowy form, its face obscured, stood with an eerie stillness, as though it was waiting for something. The creature seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, its presence suffocating the very air around them. Ashley's heart raced as she stepped forward, fear locking her in place. The figure turned toward her, its face still hidden in the depths of darkness. "You should have left," it whispered, its voice deep and hollow, like the sound of wind howling through an empty cave. Ashley's knees went weak, her body trembling. "What are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The entity stepped closer, its movements slow and deliberate. "I am the guardian of this land, and you have awakened the curse." The words echoed in her mind, sending a chill down her spine. "The curse," she repeated, barely able to speak. "What curse?" The figure's presence seemed to grow stronger, its dark energy seeping into the very air. "The curse of the lost souls, the ones who entered this forest and never returned. You are here because you sought what you did not understand." Ashley's heart hammered in her chest as the truth began to sink in. This wasn't just some wild tale. It was real. Before she could react, the creature lunged at her, its cold hands reaching for her throat. Ashley's survival instincts kicked in. She dodged to the side, her body adrenaline-fueled as she scrambled backward. Her breath came in ragged gasps as the dark figure loomed over her, its shadow swallowing the very light around her. The air felt thick, suffocating, as if the forest itself was pressing in on her. "Zara! Get up! You have to run!" Ashley screamed, her voice filled with desperation. But Zara remained motionless on the ground, her body still and unnaturally pale. Ashley's heart ached as she fought against the fear crawling up her spine. She had to protect her daughter, she had to break this curse. Ashley took a deep breath, forcing herself to focus. The creature, sensing her resistance, stepped forward, its movements predatory. She could hear the growl, deep and guttural, vibrating from within the entity itself. The words echoed in Ashley's mind, the curse of the lost souls. This thing, this entity, was the very force her grandmother had warned her about. It had claimed the souls of many before her, perhaps it had even been waiting for her bloodline, all this time. Without thinking, Ashley grabbed a large branch that had fallen nearby, its jagged end sharp enough to pierce through the darkness. She raised it in defense, her eyes locking with the entity's unseen gaze. "Stay back," she shouted, her voice trembling but strong. "You won't take her." For a moment, there was silence, the tension hanging heavy between them. The creature's growl softened, almost as if it was amused by her defiance. "You cannot fight what is already yours," it said, its voice a chilling whisper that made the hairs on Ashley's neck stand on end. But Ashley wasn't ready to give up. She didn't know how she could defeat such an ancient force, but she wouldn't let fear consume her. She thought back to the stories her grandmother had told her. There was always a way to defeat the curse, always. Ashley's heart raced, and a sudden realization hit her, the stones. The ritual stones she had seen earlier, the ones in the clearing, they were a part of this. They were the key. "Zara," Ashley whispered, her voice full of urgency. "You have to wake up. I need you to help me." For a long moment, nothing happened. But then, just as Ashley's hope began to flicker, she saw Zara's fingers twitch. Slowly, her daughter's eyes fluttered open, revealing a deep, unfathomable darkness swirling within them. Zara gasped for air, her chest heaving as though she had been underwater for too long. "Mom, what's happening?" she croaked, her voice raspy. "We're going to stop this," Ashley replied, relief flooding her body as she ran to Zara's side. The entity hissed, its dark presence pressing in on them like a storm. "You cannot escape me. You will never leave." Ashley stood tall, her fear transforming into resolve. "We already have." She grabbed Zara's hand, pulling her up. With her daughter beside her, Ashley turned and sprinted back toward the clearing. She could feel the entity behind them, its power growing stronger with every step. But she knew that she was close to breaking the curse, she had to be. They reached the clearing, and Ashley's gaze locked on the stones. She remembered the markings she had seen earlier, the ancient symbols carved deep into the surface. They held the answer. She had to use them to break the entity's grip. With Zara's trembling hand in hers, Ashley approached the stones. She placed her free hand on the nearest one and closed her eyes, remembering the words her grandmother had once spoken. "The curse can be broken, but only by those pure of heart. Only by the ones who dare face the darkness and call upon the strength of their ancestors." Ashley whispered the words under her breath, her voice steady despite the storm of fear and desperation in her chest. The ground beneath her feet trembled as she called upon the power of the earth, of her bloodline, of every survivor who had faced the curse before her. The entity screamed in fury as the stones began to glow with a bright, pure light, their energy pulsating like the heartbeat of the earth itself. The darkness around them started to waver, cracking and unraveling like a spider's web. "No," the creature howled, its form flickering and distorting. Ashley held tight to Zara's hand as the light from the stones intensified, the curse finally beginning to break. The entity's form started to dissolve, its hold over the forest weakening. "Zara, run!" Ashley shouted, but before they could move, the darkness surged once more, wrapping around Ashley's legs, pulling her into the earth. "Mom!" Zara screamed, trying to pull her away, but it was too late. The ground beneath Ashley opened up, swallowing her whole. She cried out in pain as the earth consumed her, but just as quickly, the stones began to pulse one last time. The curse broke with a deafening crack, and the earth closed in around Ashley with an explosive force. Zara fell backward, her body trembling with the shock of the explosion, but as the dust settled, she saw the forest begin to shift. The oppressive darkness lifted, and for the first time since they had entered, the air felt clean. Ashley's voice echoed in her mind, "We are free." Zara stood at the edge of the clearing, her heart still racing in her chest. The dark, oppressive energy that had plagued the forest was gone. The cursed entity had vanished, its power shattered. She looked down at the ground where her mother had been swallowed, but there was no trace of Ashley. Only the stones remained, their faint glow now fading into the night. Zara fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Mom, please come back," she whispered, her voice breaking. A gentle breeze swept through the trees, and Zara felt a sudden warmth on her skin. She looked up, and there, standing in the soft light of the clearing, was her mother. She was alive. Ashley smiled warmly at her daughter, the fear and tension in her face now gone. She looked stronger than ever before. "We did it, Zara. We broke the curse," Ashley said, her voice full of relief. Zara ran into her mother's arms, holding her tightly. She couldn't believe it, after everything they had been through, they had survived. With the curse broken and the entity defeated, the two of them made their way back to camp. They packed their things and left the forest behind, leaving the shadows and the dark past of the land in their wake. As they drove back to the small town, the weight of the event still lingered in Zara's mind. She had never imagined that the stories her mother had told her about curses and ancient forces could be real, but they had survived. They had conquered something that was beyond comprehension. They would never forget the terror they had faced in the wilderness, but the bond between mother and daughter had only grown stronger. They had proven that love and courage could overcome even the darkest of forces. The last of the sun's light dipped below the horizon as they drove toward home. The forest, the curse, and the terrifying entity were now behind them, but Zara couldn't shake the feeling that the world still held mysteries beyond her understanding. She glanced at her mother, who smiled back at her, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Zara felt a sense of peace. They had escaped. They had broken the curse. But a part of her would always remember the lessons learned in the wilderness, the strength that had come from fighting together against the dark unknown. And as the road stretched on before them, Zara knew one thing for certain: they were stronger than the darkness that once tried to consume them. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed this spine-chilling journey. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more thrilling stories. Be sure to check out the other videos appearing on your screen now, you won't want to miss them. Stay tuned for more adventures, and keep the courage alive.